I'm Derek Dingle, Chief Content Officer of Black Enterprise, and we're here at Martha's Vineyard, the ultimate summer retreat for African Americans. Among the most anticipated annual events here is the Black Economic Forum, a gathering of some of the most powerful blacks in business, finance, and corporate America. They come together to discuss strategies on how to move the needle to elevate blacks on multiple fronts. Among the event organizers is this father and son team. Shelley Stewart Jr., a corporate veteran who has served as the Chief Procurement Officer for DuPont and currently chair of the Billion Dollar Roundtable, and Shelley Stewart III, a senior partner with the consulting giant McKinsey Company. Shelley and Shelley, thank you for joining us. For the purposes of this interview, I'm going to say Shelley 2 and Shelley 3, when I make reference to you. But it is wonderful to have this interview and to be a part of this in Martha's Vineyard, the ultimate summer retreat for affluent African Americans. And what both of you have done is you've, as a team, as a father and son team, along with others, put together the Black Economic Forum, which has been an amazing event over the last 3 days before we met today. What I'd like you to do today, before we go into the Black Economic Forum, I want you to share with us first your connection with Martha's Vineyard, because you have a connection here. And then secondly, I'd like you to share your career journeys, because I want people to know, all the achievements that both of you have achieved individually as we get into talking about the Black Economic Forum. So, I'm going to start with you, Shelley, too. What has Martha's Vineyard meant to you, and what has been your experiences here?
Well, thank you, Derek. I've been coming to Martha's Vineyard for over 50 years. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a neighborhood where several families bought homes, not mine, but several other families, and was able to tag along. So I got to know the vineyard as a 13, 14-year-old kid and fell in love with it. And so we've owned the home here for over 25 years. And it's just a place that we love, right? And my children have grown up here every summer of their lives. And so it's just it's kind of a special place. It's not always as noisy as it's been the last few weeks. It's pretty quiet. It's pretty quiet most of the time, and we have a lot of lifelong friends here as well.
Well, Shelley, 3, you've had a deep connection here, as your father has mentioned, in terms of growing up here, but you have a deep personal connection here in terms of your own family.
Yeah, no, that's right. I've been very, very fortunate. I guess almost 40 years now of coming up here, including spending all birthdays but one up here, and that was when I was a new analyst working at a bank, and so just didn't work out that way that year. But I've been incredibly fortunate to have this be a place of stability in my life. I mean, we were fortunate to move around a fair amount for my dad's career and for my mom's career, and so this was always home. This was the stable place where I knew at some point in the year I'd be spending real time up here, and so this has been my place, and I have made many lifelong friendships. Many of my closest friends are people that I only saw for maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month up here on the island over the years, and those relationships have endured over time. And as you alluded to, I also had the great pleasure of being married to my wife Rochelle on this island almost exactly 8 years ago at my parents' house, which was really special. And so it's an incredible place that's so meaningful for me, and I'm grateful to be able to have my kids experiencing what I got to experience.
Well, if I have a personal side, it's been my pleasure to know both of you separately before we've had this gathering, this connection. The one thing that Martha's Vineyard has presented and has been shared is a collection of black achievers. You could say that this is also, a sanctuary of black excellence. And Shelley, you have made major achievements in the world of business, and I'd like you to tell our audience some of the things that you've done over your career and the impact that you've had.
Thank you. Well, I spent 40 years in corporate America. I worked at some of the biggest corporations around, United Technologies, Raytheon, Tyco International, DuPont. And I was in supply chain before people knew what supply chain was. Right? I was an early pioneer in supply chain, so got a chance to sort of grow up in that field and lead corporations, supply chains, and I was chief procurement officer as well. I had a number of additional responsibilities. Wonderful career, right? And just as Shelley mentioned, we moved a few times as a result of that, but I think that's what you have to do if you're going to have a good career. You can't always stay in the same city. But it's pretty exciting. And by the way, a part of my job was supplier diversity because I was the chief procurement officer. So I had an impact on a lot of black businesses in this country as a result of it. I currently chair the $1 Billion Roundtable, and that's 37 corporations in America that spend over $1 billion with minority, women, LGBT, and veteran businesses. So I'm still in the hunt and the fight to help our black businesses grow. And it's really important to me, and it was a part of throughout my career. I've always been focused on that. My real job was to deliver product on time and to save money, but my passion was to help black businesses grow.
Well, due to your passion, a number of those businesses appeared on our BE 100s, which is the list of our nation's largest black-owned businesses. So, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, Shelley, your career, share with us where your career started and what led you to your current position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say my dad's being particularly humble about his own career, but I think I love your reference to your list of businesses. When I look at the top 5 businesses, I mean, I personally know many of the founders because my dad did some of their first big contracts with them back in the 90s, and the amount of times I meet people and they say, your dad took a chance on me and my business when it wasn't a business yet. I can't count the number of times, small and large companies, and even some of the biggest ones out there. And so that's always, that's something that's not lost on me, and it sets the path for what my own responsibility is to do similar things. So I'm a senior partner at McKinsey, and I've been at McKinsey just over a decade. And I found my way there via graduate school, and prior to that I worked at an investment bank, JP Morgan, and then at my own fund for a while. So I'm a finance and consulting background.
Entrepreneur in your own right.
Yeah, and I had my own business for some time. Yeah. I wouldn't say it was a wild success, but it was. I learned a lot.
Well, you went out there, man.
I learned a lot, and I keep some of those lessons today.
Yeah.
But at McKinsey, I got the privilege of kind of wearing kind of 2 hats, and we had Mark Morial as our speaker at the forum last night, and he talked about the duality of responsibility. And I think I actually have I'm really fortunate to be able to live that in my day job. So part of what I do is I help companies, oftentimes private equity-owned companies, grow. Mm-hmm. I'm all about growth of companies' revenues and profits as hopefully an engine for economic development and job creation. And so I've spent a lot of time leading transformations and growth. But I also had the opportunity to found the Institute for Black Economic Mobility, which is where I get to live out my passion, but also tie that together with the notion of economic expansion. So I built this institute along with some great colleagues that is very focused on the economic and business imperative of equity. How do we bring more people into the economy? How do we activate all sectors of the economy to think differently about how they serve underserved customers broadly and their own responsibilities to help advance underserved communities, particularly black communities. And so I've had that privilege to lead that in addition to my more traditional work at McKinsey, and it's been very, very fulfilling for me.
Well, actually what I see in both of your stories is a continuation of using your perch within corporate America to also drive Black economic development and empowerment, which seems core to what you do, and then also your also the continuation of generational corporate leadership through the Executive Leadership Council. And you were inducted, I believe, a couple of years ago?
This year, this
Yeah,
past
this
year.
year,
I had
okay, okay.
My honor, I got to pin my son, which is pretty exciting. Derek, the other thing I wanted to add, I talked about my past background before I retired. I'm repurposed now, as I like to say. So I sit on 3 public company boards, 2 private equity boards, and 2 university boards. Howard University I'm a trustee there, and also, I think it's really important because that's part of my give back, right? And I'm also working with Aerial Alternatives on Project Black, which is something you all know about, but it's try to create large-scale Black businesses. And I'm bringing some of my corporate background and business diversity background to try to help Project Black move the needle.
Yeah, just want to spend a couple of minutes on Project Black. And I'm going to also ask you about your board experience. Project Black, part of the mandate was to buy units of corporations that were up for sale to make those now diverse-owned companies. How did that come about, and can you share with me what's in the pipeline right now? I know that you've had one acquisition.
Yeah, so I mean, so the concept is to create large-scale Black businesses because the average minority business is $4 million. So if you're trying to drive $1 billion worth of volume into a corporation, it takes a lot of $4 million companies. So those of us that are chief procurement officers or work in that space are always looking for larger scale businesses. And oh, by the way, that tends to be the excuse you hear from the folks in the companies. Well, they're not big enough to do business with us. So Melanie and Les Brunn came up with this thought process right after George Floyd that we should create a large-scale Black businesses, not necessarily buying them from corporations, but buying them from private equity, buying them from VC, and putting them together and standing up larger-scale Black businesses. So our first company that we have in our portfolio is Sorensen, and they do all kinds of things for the deaf impaired, and it's a really good company, and we just added a bolt-on acquisition, an MBE, to that business as well. So we can continue to grow. We've got 8 verticals that we're looking at, and the deal pipeline is pretty full right now.
Amazing. It goes to our CEO's philosophy that the challenge for Black businesses today is not one of capital, but it's one of scale.
That's right.
So that we can access some of those larger contracts. The Black Economic Forum. Why did you decide to focus on the areas that you decided to focus on? You looked at technology, you looked at climate risk, you looked at private investment. Naturally people would say, well, understand technology and private investment, but climate risk is something that's usually not associated with African Americans. So can you break those down, Shelley, and talk about why it was important to focus on those areas, especially as it aligns with economic mobility and that thrust?
Absolutely. And maybe the first, if I just start one click up, is why have the forum? And I think there's even a question of why do it on Martha's Vineyard?
Yep.
And I think there's even maybe a little bit of conflict.
This why was it started?
That's right.
Why was it started?
Exactly. This notion of, as you mentioned, there are a lot of folks up here that are maybe affluent or doing better than the average American or Black American. And so why do it, and why do it here? And for me, one of the core principles that underlies the work that we do at the Institute and in the forum is we are not solely focused on the important work of putting more African Americans in the C-suite or in partner positions at law firms or in tenured professorships at universities. We care about that. But there are many folks focused on raising the ceiling, and they should do that work. We're also focused on lifting the floor. And so for me, what's really important is if we as a community of people who have been fortunate because of hard work, because of factors that are out of our control, luck, to have been successful, we have an obligation when we're together to be talking about how we're going to help those who are in desperate need of our help, right? We saw the statistics of that something like 60% of Black Americans are earning less than $30,000 a year. You can't live on less than $30,000 a year. It doesn't matter where you live in this country. And so we do it here. We do it acknowledging the privilege and recognizing the commensurate responsibility that we have to be working to design solutions that are going to help not just us on this island, but more importantly, the folks that are living in a lot of these underserved areas. And I live in Brooklyn, New York, and there's lots of neighborhoods in Brooklyn that are deeply, deeply underinvested in. And so these are the conversations we're having now. The specific topics.
Just want to go
Sure.
a step back.
Yep.
Because you were a part of the founding members. And can you talk about the founding of the group and then eventually the partnership with McKinsey, ELC,
Yep.
and then the growth of the forum?
Right. So it was about 6 years ago. The Boulay has been doing this event, an event here for a while, and it was really around their black male initiative to raise funds for it. So they had that set up, and a bunch of us cross organizations, ELC, Boulay, etc. So Ron Parker, Greg Devins, Greg Jones, and myself had a meeting about what we could come together to do. And Ron Parker coined this phrase, Black Davos. He said, we need to convene and talk about the subjects that we don't talk about in the normal conferences, and bring Black people that are in all kinds of different spaces, tech, business, entrepreneurs, VCs, PE, in a room to convene, to come up, to talk about solutions, and to talk about how we can work together. Our goal is not just to have a meeting, but is to have a set of actions come out of these meetings and to bring people together that can work together outside of this conference. And so that's been the theme, is not just to talk about the normal sort of mundane things, but if you look at the various agendas we've had, there probably are no sessions or other conferences that have such a cross-section of agendas. And we're doing that on purpose, because I thought, when you sit in the room with these people, you're pretty amazed at where Black folks are placed. You probably don't know that the Black VC guy exists if you're in some other room, right? So we're trying to bring these people together for a number of reasons, but one, so they can meet each other.
Yeah.
Two, right? And the second thing is maybe we can come up with some solutions to some of the things that are plaguing our communities, right? And we teamed with McKinsey because there's nobody with better data, better thought leadership around this subject. And I'm happy to say it's my son and the McKinsey Black Institute where a lot of that, and his team, where a lot of that data comes from. And the data is so powerful, it helps inform the conversations that we have.
Well, before you go to the topic, how is it to work with your dad?
No, it's a fantastic experience, and we come across each other professionally now a lot more and more these days, which is a fantastic thing. And as I said, one of the gifts of having your parent work in corporate America, you're not to say you're old, but for 40 years, is that if they've walked through that career in a certain type of way, lots of benefits accrue to you. And that doesn't always happen, but my dad is very conscious of treating people as people and finding interest in them and committing to things that they care about. And so he's built a broad set of relationships, and to a person, you meet someone, they say, oh, I know your dad. It's always, and I remember the way he made me feel. And so I'm mindful of that, and working together has been great.
So, Ron Parker, former president and CEO of the ELC, Executive Leadership Council, the organization, the preeminent organization of black senior executives, now president and CEO of Nash. You get together, and you bring McKinsey into the fold, and then you decide to come up with a range of different topics that African Americans should know about, and align it with how it impacts African Americans from an economic standpoint and a business standpoint.
That's right. That's right. And I would be remiss to not mention that I had a great partner on this journey on the McKinsey side, a gentleman named Jason Wright, who is now the president of the Washington Commanders, the football team, and he and I were partners together on the journey, and we did this, and his presence is still an important part of the work that we do. So I want to make sure I mention and give him the proper credit that he deserves.
So this year, the topics that you had, why did you select those topics, and how does it align with the current business environment overall, and then the financial and economic challenges that African Americans are facing right now?
Yeah. Look, I think we modeled the Institute for Black Economic Mobility after McKinsey Global Institute, which is McKinsey's think tank that's been around for a very long time, and we stand kind of firmly on the platform that they have built, and we're also mindful of that. But one of the things there is about leading data, but insights really on the topics that CEOs and leaders should be thinking about in the moment. So some of it is about what is relevant and timely. And so that's kind of one principle. The second thing is, if I look across the landscape and I think about, because I'm forward looking, I'm thinking about disruption and risk, and then I'll come back to the other side of it. AI, Gen AI, I mean, we've been looking at this topic of the future of work for many years now and trying to understand what that means for the black worker. And the story is not getting better. As the technology advances and accelerates and displacement happens, we're in roles that are more likely to be displaced. And so Gen AI is maybe the next evolution of that broader discussion. And so we want to frame that up and lay the groundwork for that. But it's also creating a generational opportunity for us to, anytime there's disruption, and it'll be the same thing for the climate transition, there's an opportunity. It's just a question of who takes advantage of it. And so a lot of the work that we are looking at is what has to happen further upstream in terms of educational pathways and career development that positions people for the jobs of the future. And how do we make sure that when that happens, because it will happen in the economy, how do we make sure that folks that have traditionally been left behind or under-resourced are better served there? And so that's the AI piece of it. I think on the climate issue and the green energy transition, very similar thing. Some of my colleagues walk through the significant risks and the disproportionate impact of those risks on black and brown communities, whether it be physical risks from flooding and hurricanes. One of the things that we looked at is we looked at places that would suffer disproportionate damage as the climate warms from things like flooding and hurricanes, and we overlaid that with the redlining data. And surprise, surprise, take a place like Baltimore, and there's several other places, there's a high correlation between areas that will be disproportionately impacted in a city and places that were redlined. And so you've got neighborhoods that are majority black, 75% plus, and the impact is double a suburban area that's just X amount of miles down the road. And so one of the really important things for economic mobility is having a stable community. And you can't do that in the context of lots of disproportionate physical disruption from climate change. And so one, we want to call that out because everyone is thinking about this in the private and public and social sector, and we want to make sure that they recognize certain communities. We need to start there. But then two, there's a massive, again, economic opportunity. New jobs, lots of federal subsidy coming down for different technologies. I mean, it's another big opportunity for us to be thinking about how do we train the workers of the future to take advantage of the green economy? How do we make sure businesses are incubated and scaled to take advantage of structural changes in profit pools and so on? And so those those two things represent real disruption as we see it, as well as real opportunity, and you overlay impact investing because we firmly believe that the system that we have is capitalism today. So we need to be talking about how private capital is going to facilitate these things, both driving returns, right, which is the premise of what we talked about, but also driving human development outcomes. And we fundamentally believe that you can do both. And we've seen investors that are doing it successfully.
So much of the conference dealt with, data, and you can't get better than McKinsey in that area, and analysis. So you went from data and analysis to using this as a, platform for ideation, and then execution of concepts and ideas. Is that, the focus of, having these discussions?
From my perspective, absolutely. I think my dad said it. We don't have any kind of false sense that we're going to solve these big issues in that room. But what we fundamentally believe and what we've seen historically is sets of people in that room tend to cluster around similar ideas. And then you'll come back a year later and you'll find out that they've been working on some issues. So, think about it today. We had the EPA administrator in the room, a cabinet level leader in the Biden administration. You've got impact investors from 5 or 6 different impact funds. You've got corporations who play in the energy space represented in the room and in the technology space. And you start to see those little seeds get planted and people break away and go have a discussion. And the hope is that through a structured discussion, starting with the facts and the insights, a facilitated dialogue from people who really know it, who can give context to the data and things like that, and talk about what they're observing in the real world, then leads to ideation and people going off and doing small things. So it is actually a very diffused impact model. We're not trying to say, when we walk out of here, everyone's got to work on this one thing. But we're trying to say, go work on something with someone you met in this room.
And let me say this too. There was one today where the administrator from the EPA was up and he had a director with him, and they have a lot of money. And there was a person in the audience that got a clarification on those dollars because they thought there were some restrictions around how those dollars could be invested, how they got those dollars. I could see the light bulbs going on in the room, and those are the kinds of things that we're looking to make happen.
Yeah, that's what I found fascinating about it. As you said, EPA Administrator Regan, he talked about, the $100 billion that they're going to focus on in terms of the whole area of the environment, and then part of that is his focus on, trying to clean up, these, environments that have lead, pollution, which has affected the water system, which affects our communities. But the key is looking at those areas, also areas of opportunities where you can, birth entrepreneurship. That's the critical piece. And then, as you said, bring together those capital sources to make it happen. My question is, you had roughly 220 people attended there.
Yep.
If you're trying to gain a ripple effect, is that a large enough group of people? And is some of the thought to expand the forum so that you can have that critical, the critical mass that, that impact that would go across the nation, as opposed to having it concentrated amongst?
And that's the dilemma, right? Whether you keep it small enough so it's intimate enough for people to work together, or do you expand it? And we've been struggling with that. I think the answer to it is keeping it the right size so people can interact with each other, and not having it too large, because to Shelley's point, we found that after that session, people have gotten together to go do some things, right? And the other part of it is venue opportunities here on the vineyard are limited if you get the crowd too big, right? So we're a bit constrained from that perspective as well.
What do you anticipate the outcome,
Yeah.
Shelley?
Well, but maybe just
today?
back on this point, I think there are many ways to disseminate the insights that we generate. And by the way, we as McKinsey Institute for Black Economic Mobility, we show up in lots of different convenings, whether it be with Milken or Aspen or Davos. So we're trying to make sure that we show up. One of our pillars for impact is to show up anywhere and everywhere so anyone will listen to the topic of black economic mobility, and even some places where they don't want us there. Because we firmly believe that the message we have is a message that resonates if people listen to it, which is, if we drive better economic outcomes for those that are underserved, all of us will be better off. And so the other thing that we do is, in the past we've done virtual forums where we've had larger audiences, but we're starting to disseminate more of the information from the forum, video clips, and so it may not mean this particular event grows to be significantly larger, but this becomes one event in an ecosystem of events, but also is augmented by the dissemination of material, whether it be videos and written content. And in terms of the intended impact, I think in the end it's about the ultimate outcome is to move and advance economic mobility, which ultimately does create wealth. But I like to talk about the economic mobility frame because, frankly, it is, I think we have more direct, I think the wealth accrual is the outcome of us advancing economic mobility for people through incomes and through other things. And so I think that's the ultimate goal. Now, the interim goals are, if we can activate 50% of the people that were at the forum, because there's two types of things. We go away and work on something together. The other big thing is you have a lot of executives there. And one of the things that we try to do is empower those executives with the facts, with the inspiration, with the newfound sense of urgency to go back and have discussions in their communities and in their companies. And so we always find there's this window 30 to 60 days after the forum where I get a flurry of calls in my team to come, hey, can you come talk to our executive team? Or hey, that's exactly what we want. Not from a self-serving McKinsey perspective, but we want to use the moment to go get in front of people in these institutions to go have a candid conversation about what the opportunity is.
Yeah. And then the ripple effect also comes from the fact that you have this collection of organizations that are part of it, and then their members go
Right,
out.
that's right, exactly
and
right.
They enlist, yeah.
Exactly right. And what interests me over the last couple of days is to meet the people in the room. I mean, they're people from all aspects of our community. HBCU, United Negro College Fund, VC, corporate America, PE, government. I mean, we had 2 congressmen show up, right? I mean, so I'm not sure how many places you can go where you have that kind of mix where people actually get to hear from all of these folks also. I think that's important because there's a set of dynamics going on in there that I haven't, I've been to 1 million conferences like you that I haven't felt in other rooms.
Yeah. Well, the thing that struck me was for me as an attendee this year, and thank you for that, is the education, level of education, and clarifying misinformation about certain topics. And once you clarify the misinformation, then you push aside the fear, and then people focus on opportunities. Or the reluctance to engage in those areas. But a part of the forum was about politics, and obviously you had Mark Morial there, and he had talked about the equity pledges that were made as it related to African Americans after the tragic murder of George Floyd, and making corporations accountable to those pledges, especially in light of the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action. Give me your impressions of that. Give me your impressions of whether that will gain traction and that we can make corporations accountable for the equity pledges as part of the charge.
Well, first of all, I would say, because I chair the $1 Billion Roundtable, I was intimately involved with a lot of that, right? Because I had 32 companies a few years ago, actually 28, a few years ago before George Floyd, then 32, now 37. We think we're on our way to 50. So I said to Mark, I said, well, and to Ron Parker, I said, there are some corporations that are not going to be stopped by all the noise out there. And I said, we should recognize them. And we should ask them to help us figure out how to bring their compadres along on the journey. Because these CEOs are all in the same room, right? And the question is, how do we do that? We're about to publish the $1 Billion Roundtable Economic Impact Report, and I'll make sure you get a copy of it. But one of the numbers is we spend, through that 37 corporations, $158 billion with minority, women, LGBT, and veteran businesses, right? And I have at least 5 corporations knocking at the door to get into BDR as a part of their commitment they made during George Floyd. So I don't think all corporations are, not keeping up with their commitments. And do I think Mark and Reverend Al should be chasing the other ones? The answer is yes, right? But I also think the ones that are doing a good job, we should let everyone know that, because they're out there, they're doing it. And by the way, I've also talked to a couple of the CEOs that said this affirmative action thing is not going to deter us from our mission of driving business diversity, supply diversity in our company, right? It's not. And so I feel good about that. Now, are there corporations that are going to get weak at the knees? Yes. And we have to, and those are the ones we need to go after to make sure they understand they need to keep their commitments.
And as Mark also said, being able to make the strong case that, diversity should be a business imperative, and that it's a driver in terms of innovation and profitability and market.
Yeah, I can tell you as a chief procurement officer, I don't hire bad suppliers no matter what color they are. All right, just to be clear. And I'm sure my colleagues that are out there across corporate America, and I know most of them, we didn't get paid to hire bad suppliers. We got paid to hire good, capable suppliers. And we used to do this exercise at DuPont called Mythbusters. And we talked to the people, the buyers, about, so we had this list of questions about minority suppliers. And one of them was, do you think this is a set-aside program, or are we doing them a favor? And you'd be surprised how many people thought yes. Well, the answer is no, right? And we hire, sometimes MBEs have more innovative capabilities than big corporations because we don't know how to get out of our own way, right? So we try to make sure that the myths that are out there about our businesses, our black businesses, our Hispanic businesses, MBEs in general, are blown away, because that's the excuse, right? And we have to make sure there are no excuses.
So what do you expect the outcome to be for this forum? I know next year you'll do a report. What do you want that report to state, or what do you believe that report will state based on the information shared, and then and really it was electricity in the room when you heard the idea sharing. What do you anticipate will come?
I mean, I'll give just one, because I think there'll be many. I think there's really something there on this climate transition linked to all of the federal money coming out of these bills. I think there's significant actionable things that can be done across the public sector folks that were in the room, across the investors in the room, and across the corporations in the room, and the philanthropists in the room, to develop some initiatives that ensure that there are elements of equity that flow from this coming transition. So I feel optimistic that we'll come back, and I know my team had a couple of discussions that we're going to come back with some things and some ideas to help sharpen that confluence of all the different sectors around this green energy transition, and really come back with something that we can be proud of. I don't know what that thing is going to be yet, but that's the topical area where I feel like we had a lot of energy and buzz in the room.
Yeah, I was. What impressed me greatly was the growth in impact investing.
Yep.
And what that's happening in the community, and the sophisticated models that are coming up, and the capital flows that are coming through. And then the second piece is the power of the HBCUs. Not only in terms of being a well for recruitment, but also in terms of capital, investing in the case of Lotoni, their VC model. And we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, I think this notion, which has been, there's been a groundswell building for a while now, but if you take the broader view of HBCUs, 100 plus, and you think about them as anchor institutions that have a footprint that mirrors, not perfectly, but mirrors a large portion of the black population, how do we use those as anchor institutions to facilitate a lot of the things we're trying to do? Whether it be, national labs and anchoring them as hubs of innovation, as it relates to this energy topic. The same thing on the AI front. I do think they're, particularly in the broader context of what we've been discussing that's going on in higher education, now is the time to lean in and double down and build on the great legacy and history of these institutions. And that's private capital, that's public capital, because many of the publics get a lot of their funding from public funding sources. But I do think that there is something really, really exciting about that, and I think it cuts across all industries. They're doing some interesting stuff in the AUC around TV and film, given some of the TV production companies that are based down there. And again, I mentioned AI and the green energy transition, and Howard has democracy and journalism, and that's cutting across HBCUs, and they've got their Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And the general theme of how do we get these institutions working as a cohort? Yeah, we need individual institutions will have value propositions, and they'll compete with one another for the top talent, for the top black talent. But there's a whole lot more opportunity for collaboration. And how do we get 1 + 1 = 3 in that context? So I do think you're right. There's a cross-cutting theme of HBCUs as an anchor to help facilitate a lot of these things that we've been discussing.
Yeah, I felt that in the room today too. I didn't realize how many HBCU folks were going to be there, because I never look at the attendance list. But when I met a lot of them that were there, and the interesting thing is, to Shelley's point, those universities, HBCUs that are getting R1 status, Research 1 status, will get more grants from the U.S. government. Howard's about to become an R1 school. It will allow them to get more dollars funneled their way to do broader research. And that's what we need to hope for the other HBCUs as well.
I have two more questions. Shelley, you talked about your board experience. And I know obviously you've looked at corporate governance and the need for greater diversity, and Black Enterprise has been involved with that. In fact, in terms of talking to Ron, he said some of that is kind of scaling back, and also talking to Michael Hyder at ELC, or he has concerns about that. Can the forum be used as a sort of a ground to seed recruitment to boards, or used to train, future board members, or to create cohorts, that could be under consideration for board service?
Well, the answer is yes, it could be, but ELC has a initiative for, it's called the Corporate Board Initiative, which does specifically what you talked about. We have a new cohort group right now. I actually came through the cohort program, CBI program, and now I'm an advisor on it. And the Boulay has Blacks on Corporate Boards, and I'm on that committee too. So both of these organizations that are involved with this forum already have existing mechanisms to train and prepare African Americans for board service. And the ELC and Boulay have been actually working together, collaborating on those efforts as well. And I can tell you, after George Floyd, the phone was ringing off the hook. It's gotten a bit quiet now, because I actually see all incomings for both organizations, incoming requests. So the numbers are down. They're still coming, but they're not as much as large as they were in the aftermath of George Floyd.
Yeah, we do a list of the representation of blacks on S&P boards, and it just it was a big jump in between after George Floyd, and it'll be interesting to see what our reporting shows this year.
You do it yearly?
We do it annually.
Okay.
Yeah,
Annually, okay.
And naturally, we've shared that information to ELC and other
Yes.
groups to try to push forward the diversity agenda as it related to corporate boards.
Can I just make one point on this, which is, I think corporate boards are really, really important. Obviously, it's they drive and can shape the agenda of our major corporations. But I think if we focus too much on boards, we run the risk of potentially letting companies off the hook. I posit that board diversity is easier for a company than executive diversity. And there's and you know this, I'm preaching to the choir. And the issue is the pipeline to CEO is incredibly thin. And the way you make that up for board diversity, which is great, my dad sits on several boards, but the pipeline of people that are eligible for that may not actually change much if we don't force folks to focus on 1 and 2 levels below the C-suite and really try to understand what they're doing to develop a robust pipeline, which some people may call it DE&I, and I'm just saying, are you fostering the best talent, because the best talent is in fact diverse, and creating those pathways to the C-suite and to the CEO seat, frankly.
My add to that is, I agree with them. I also say, if you're in the boardroom, you get to ask the questions, right? You get to see the senior staff, and you can say, why there's no one that looks like me here? What's going on? And by the way, I have done that, right? And because it's art, we aren't there to just be the furniture in the room. Or, most of these boards that we're on, we're probably the only person of color, and specifically black person on the board, right? And it's part of our responsibility to make sure when we're in those rooms that we're saying, pushing for more.
I agree with both of you, but I raise you one.
Excellent.
I think there should be greater diversity and selection of the board members beyond people who just reside in, say, the C-suite, or who are the CFO, who are, just within corporation. I think it should be seated with entrepreneurs as well, because when you're talking about trying to fuel innovation, there are plenty of African American entrepreneurs out there who can really drive the growth and opportunities for these companies.
I agree with you.
Okay. So, I didn't do that just to get a favor, but I do think that's
and younger folks too. I think too. We'll throw that in there. Younger folks on the boards as well.
That's the next question I was going to ask you. When you're looking at the forum, is there an intentional focus to look at younger attendees?
We just had that conversation today.
Yeah.
You wanna tell them?
One of the things we've been playing with is, as we think about the programming at the forum, could we and should we be designing a set of sessions that appeal to folks that are, I don't know, but say like 20 to 35, and bringing them into the dialogue a little bit earlier. One, to share what we have to share, but also to learn and get advice and create that continuity so that we have that kind of pipeline of folks that are going to carry the work on. So I think that is something that we're actively considering, and I think it's a very good and reasonable thing to do.
I think the focus should be on, not just young or seasoned, it should be multi-generational.
Yeah.
Because then we grow.
That's
and then
right.
we learn from one another.
That's right.
Just as we had the discussions today. So this has been a great discussion. I really enjoyed the economic forum, for myself and my own growth. But I'm glad we have this chance to sit down and share it with our audience. And I look forward to further engagement next year and sharing the outcomes that came from this year.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Okay.
Thanks.